Welcome everybody to the fourth in a series of peer-to-peer webinars for the RC&D councils. Today's topic is water quality and 319 grants. I'm Susan McKinney. I'm the Executive Director for Appalachian RC&D Council. We're up in Northeast Tennessee, and we are representing the National Association of RC&D Councils for this webinar series. The National Association of RC&D Councils has embraced a new model of engaging and supporting local councils. This new approach utilizes subawards that provide funds, leverage local investment, and build capacity across the landscape. The approach was launched in earnest in June 2019, and in the past 14 months, more than 35 subawards have obligated $389,000 for projects across the country. The funds come from the USDA and RCS, and they facilitate outreach and training on farm bill programs, support youth interns, career development, and build partnerships with local and national conservation organizations. This is the fourth of an eight-part webinar series that will be held with the support of NRCS, with the goal of expanding these activities by highlighting success stories and creating connections. We have a quick survey that Rosie is going to deploy. If you would, take that. Do I need to stop sharing? There we go. While you're doing that, I just have some brief introductions. Joining me today is Dana York. She's the retired Associate Chief for NRCS. She's a farm owner, and she's the facilitator for this webinar series. We have Jan Surface she's a National Water Quality Specialist with NRCS, and Linda Hall, Chief of Non-Point Source Control Branch of the EPA. Also, we have Rosie McVeigh running the Technical Assistant. She's our AmeriCorps service member with ARC&D. And we will, I'll turn it over to Dana, but I just want to say that if you're not the person currently speaking, if you would just keep yourself muted until we do the Q&A kind of thing.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And for those joining us, if you could put in the chat your name and the organization you're from, that way we can kind of see where we are in the country and who's with us today. So it is a pleasure for me today to be here for our water quality session. And these sessions were selected based on a survey that was done by Appalachian RC&D at the beginning of this grant. And so the topics that we're doing are the highest rated. And so today we are talking about water quality in 319. And our first speaker, a friend of mine, Jan Surface, will speak, and she is our water quality specialist within RCS and also an aquatic ecologist. So Jan, if you want to share your screen, you can get started.
Great, thanks so much, Dana. It's very nice to be here today. We'll make sure this is up. Are you seeing it now?
Almost. Now we are.
Great. So today I'd like to talk about a couple of opportunities with grants and agreements related to water quality that I think could be good places that RC&Ds could engage with NRCS. I know a lot of your councils already are very familiar with our programs and grant opportunities, but I thought I'd share a couple that are somewhat newer, and I think they've got a lot of partnership options in them. And there we go. Advancing, sorry, it was a little delayed. So today I'm going to highlight two of our funding opportunities. There are others, and I'll give you a link to get on a listserv that lists other grant opportunities later in my presentation. But today I'm going to highlight our Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And then second one that folks might not be as familiar with, the Conservation Partnership Program, which we run through a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation agreement. So that's one that may be off some people's radar, and I wanted to highlight today to the councils. So I'll start with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It's really focused on co-investing targeted, innovative natural resources solutions. This was first developed in the 2014 Farm Bill. It's been updated significantly in the 2018 Farm Bill, but it's really our leading partnership program within the agency. Initially in the 2014 Farm Bill, it was skimming money from our other Farm Bill programs, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, and others. But when it was reauthorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, it came with its own standalone funding of $300 million annually. So it's got its own treasury code. It still is following some guidance and program eligibility requirements from those previous programs, but now it has its own sole source funding, which really gives us more flexibility. RCPP promotes coordination of conservation activities with partners that add value-added contributions and expand what we can do on farm, in watersheds, and addressing regional natural resource concerns. As of 2018, RCPP now comes in what their team calls 3 flavors. The classic RCPP is our traditional program, just like 2014's version. We work directly with partners to apply our typical kinds of conservation practices on the ground. The second RCPP is the opportunity to renew existing RCPP projects. After that first 4 years of RCPP in the 2014 Farm Bill, there were some projects that really stood out as super achievers. They got a lot of conservation on the ground. They had developed and expanded partnerships with non-traditional partners. They leveraged additional financial resources and technical resources above and beyond the goal of a one-to-one leverage. And we really recognized that we should take advantage of the momentum that was built in those original projects and have the opportunity to renew those for additional work. So that's now an option, is to, on good projects, they can ask for a renewal to extend and get additional funding. And then the third flavor are alternative funding arrangements. And these are really more progressive, for progressive approaches. It really puts the partner in the leadership role in how the program is going to be delivered. And NRCS really steps back and lets the partner deliver the program that they would like to deliver without as many stipulations to follow NRCS program arrangements. So that enhanced alternative arrangements has some sidebars to it in the language of the Farm Bill. We can only award up to 15 alternative funding arrangement projects. And like I mentioned, they're really more grant-like and rely on the partner capacity to implement the activities. So NRCS does not really provide any technical assistance for those projects. Also new in 2018, the 3 funding pools were reduced to 2. There used to be a national pool that was really focused on multi-state collaborations. That was eliminated. And now we only have 2 pools, the critical conservation areas or the state and then / multi-state funding pool. So you can see where that went. They combine like the state and multi-state together into one funding pool. Also heavily emphasized in this new version of RCPP is an emphasis on project outcomes. Every RCPP project must now develop and report on environmental outcomes. So that's really a new focus for RCPP. The covered programs that Are used in RCPP are the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, our Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, all versions of that, the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, which is not used a lot, but occasionally. Also, our PL 566 Small Watershed Program, which at another time where perhaps I can send to Dana, I think that's a very underutilized program for ecosystem-based projects. I think a lot of people know the PL 566 program for our flood control dams, which at this point we're doing a lot of rehabilitation on those 1960s dams. But the authority within the Small Watershed Program really allows for more large-scale, off-farm, ecosystem, water quality focused restoration projects. And we have a number of those that were funded through using that authority in RCPP. For example, stream bank restoration in Western Arkansas to eliminate sediment transport down to the public water supply. And the cost of doing that upstream work was exponentially cheaper than trying to deal with the sediment at the water treatment facility itself. So it's really, really broad authority, and I just want to highlight that. And then new for 2018, the Conservation Reserve Program was added, which is actually a Farm Service Agency program, but NRCS is the technical arm for CRP, so that was now an added program to RCPP. The principles of RCPP are really, and how we look at project proposal reviews, the impact of the project, the partner contributions, including bringing on non-traditional partners, industry partners, how innovative are the solutions to the resource concerns that are being addressed, and then the partnerships and project management. So just to give you a heads up, there's an annual cycle for the announcement for program funding for RCPP. In 2021, we anticipate the announcement of program funding to come out sometime in the summer of 2021. Requests for projects can range from $250,000 up to $10 million. There's a match goal, but not a requirement of at least a one-to-one match. And the magnitude and significance of partner contributions does factor into the evaluation criteria. Proposals are accepted from all states as well as our territories. And I've given a hot link, or it's super easy if you just do a web search for NRCS RCPP program, information pops up on that. It's, let's see, I did want to show you just this, and I had someone, a partner call me up yesterday. How do I find out when, your opportunities are available? And I have this myself, even though I'm not someone who applies for grants. All of our grant opportunities, and this is federal wide, are posted on grants.gov. And you can actually set up a subscription where you will get emails on when grant opportunities are posted. So if you haven't gotten on this and set up a subscription, I recommend that you do. If you go to the homepage, there's this tab, Connect. Under that is Manage Subscriptions. When you click on that, you can either say all, which then your email will be inundated with a lot of emails, or you can do a specific criteria, whether it be an agency or water quality, or there are search criterias, and you'll get emails based on grant opportunities related to your search criteria. So recommend you set up that Manage Subscriptions in grants.gov so that you don't miss out on any of these opportunities. Just before I move on to the next one, there are a lot of RC&D councils who are partners on our RCPP programs. So you have a lot to offer, not only working with farmers, doing outreach for those projects. The projects can pay for salaries to do that kind of work. So you are an obvious partner to me for a lot of RCPP projects. So just encourage you to look at that as an opportunity. The second one I'll quickly highlight is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Conservation Partnership Program. It's in partnership with NIFWIF, NRCS, and then General Mills has started kicking in some money. So there's a non-traditional partner for us who's now putting in money. It's a competitive grant program, and we're looking to adopt conservation practices and regenerative agricultural principles on working lands. It has the goal of advancing NRCS's landscape conservation initiatives, NIFWIF's conservation priorities, and then also in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their Working Lands for Wildlife program, which is NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service collaborative program. We want to maximize the benefits of those. You're probably wondering, this is a water quality presentation. Why are you bringing this up? There is language in that we can also look at ecosystem-based initiatives that address other resource concerns, such as water quality, that have a nexus with wildlife. And it's not too hard to really link those two. Any water quality that gets to a stream or any water issues that get to a stream are affecting that aquatic habitat. So the nexus is super easy to justify there. The focus is stitching together existing initiatives and identifying biologically based performance indicators. In the current agreement, there's a list of program priority areas. I won't go through all of them, but I will highlight, since you guys are hosting, there's a Central Appalachia program, but there's others that certainly you fall under. These are considered every year, but then additional priorities may be selected when mutually agreed to by NIFWIF and NRCS. Eligible entities include 501c, 501Cs, farmer-led, so certainly councils fall into these nonprofit eligibilities. Right now for 2021, the geographic focus areas will be Upper Mississippi River, Southern Great Plains, Pacific Salmon, Western Water, and Working Lands for Wildlife. I was looking at, and I know we have multiple RC&Ds, not just the Tennessee folks online, but for Tennessee, it was really Working Lands for Wildlife, that fourth priority that you would fall under. I see you have an Eastern hellbender, which I think they're one of the coolest creatures, is one of the Working Land for Wildlife's target species. So that there's always opportunities, and they're changing every year. So this is one to keep your eye on. Right now, there's actually an active request for proposals open. The pre-proposals are due April 6th. And just to let you know, pre-proposals are not a huge deal. They're like a 4-page thing. So this is not out of the realm of possibility of applying between now and the 6th, because it's not a huge lift. If selected for a full proposal, those will be due at the end of May. Here's a hot link to this current request, or you can search for the NIFWIF 2021 Conservation Partners Program, and it'll pull up all that information.
Can you put those
So
links in,
with that, I'm
put
at
those
the
links
end
in
of
the
my
chat?
presentation.
You're muted, Dana.
Doing my own things that I tell people to do. Jan, can you put that last thing in the chat? Someone request that, and we're going to let Linda talk, and then we'll do more questions. So if you'll stop sharing, but I think if you can just put the link and maybe those dates in the chat for us while Linda's talking.
Yep, and I will just end slideshow, and then I stop
Yes.
sharing. Okay.
Okay, and again, we have Linda Hall, who is the chief for the non-point source branch at EPA Office of Wetlands. So Linda, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you. Are my slides showing up okay?
They are.
All right, great. Then I will just move right ahead. And I'm also happy to note that Sid Curtis, who is actually the brains behind this presentation and behind most of our program data that enabled us to pull out the facts and figures I'll be able to share on RC&D involvement in 319 projects, is here. So if I have any tough questions, I'll hand them to Sid, but I did want to acknowledge that she's on the line with us. So we're really happy to be able to share with you about the 319 program and points of engagement in that, and then also to describe some ways that RC&Ds are already engaged. So we'll do a quick background on non-point source pollution and Section 319 and the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act, the program itself, how we measure success, how we're structured to get projects on the ground, and then again highlighting RC&D. So for us, it all starts here, which is the language pulled directly from the Clean Water Act. And on your left-hand side is the language in the Act that describes what a point source is. And the Clean Water Act doesn't describe what a non-point source is, but EPA has gone ahead and done so. And that's on the left side of the slide. And basically it's any pollution from a diffuse source, normally precipitation driven, that from any source that's not permitted, that ends up in waterways in excess amounts. So non-point source pollution is diverse. Many people, when they think of 319, think of agriculture, and certainly that's a big part of our portfolio. But we find it important to emphasize that the program deals with many sources and types of non-point source pollution, including on-site disposal systems, septic systems, which can be significant sources of nutrients and pathogens, acid mine drainage from legacy operations, unregulated urban suburban runoff, and the others that you see here. This slide just makes the point we probably all know, but is important to emphasize, which is that with the focus under the Clean Water Act and in the United States for 40 plus years now on permitting discrete point source discharges, industrial pipes and wastewater treatment plants and the like. We've done a very good job on that. And at the same time, non-point source pollution has mushroomed and is now by far, the most dominant set of causes of water quality impairment. So the data you see here are data that are reported to EPA every couple of years by the states. The Clean Water Act requires them to report to EPA, what are the to assess their waters and report to EPA the state of their waters. And in doing that, to also identify the waters that are impaired. So that's kind of the language of the Clean Water Act. And impaired means there's more of a pollutant than the state's water quality standards would say should be there, whether it's sediment, excess nutrients, acidity. The state has adopted water quality standards that articulate what the water needs in order to be swimmable and fishable and usable for all its good purposes. And if it's impaired under the Clean Water Act, that means it's not doing that. The pollution levels are too high or other parameters are off such that those uses are not available. So what these charts show for rivers and streams and lakes is what states have reported as sources of impairments. And it's a lot of data, but basically the rows that are in blue are non-point sources, and you can see that those are the dominant one. Section 319, it basically lays out a framework for EPA to work with states and tribes on non-point source pollution control, and then it provides grant funding. So the framework starts with the state's non-point source management programs. And the Act recognized, it's a large universe of non-point source out there. we need a plan, and we need to prioritize. And so states are, we're required to do that in order to get original 319 funding, and then through our program guidelines are required to update those plans. So every 5 years, a state updates its non-point source management plan, and this is its 5-year roadmap for, you know, what watersheds will it focus in, what partners will it emphasize, what suite of non-point source problems will the state be tackling in that 5-year time frame. So keep that in mind. That's an important point of reference for RC&Ds that want to get more involved with their state's non-point source program. And then under 319H, that authorizes the grant program itself. And then we also have guidelines that flesh out a lot further EPA's expectations for the use of 319 funding, and those can be found at that link. So the way we view the 319 program is that it's a program that operates on all these levels. It operates at the national level, which is where Sid and I work, and we have kind of broad oversight and accountability to make sure the funds are well invested, to make sure we can support states and tribes and technical needs that they have, to make sure we're able to speak intelligently about how the funds are invested and the outcomes that they're generating. The non-point source program, the 319 program, also operates at the state level, and you know, each state has its management program, which I just mentioned, and then it also operates at a watershed level, and we'll get to that in a minute. So the boxes here at the bottom say a bit about the funding. So let me cover that now. So we get our appropriation from Congress every year. And right now this year we're actually up a little bit. We got $177 million. 5% of that goes off the top to tribes. And then there's an allocation formula that distributes the funds to states and territories. You can find that in the guidelines if you're interested. But the ranges provided here, basically, if you're a small state like Rhode Island, it's probably about $1 million. If you're California, it's $8 million or so. So that just gives you a range of 319 funding across the board. There is a non-federal match that is required, and that's required by statute. So we really can't change that, and that can be a challenge. The good news is there doesn't have to be a 40% match on every single project. The state has to meet the 40% match on the grant as a whole by the end of the grant period. So states do have flexibility when they fund projects, whether they require full match from each project. So on the right side, the box on the right side of the slide here also makes an important point about the funding. So the funding goes out to the states, let's say, and then our guidelines enable the states to use up to half of the funding for any activity to support their non-point source management plan. And a lot of that funding goes to staffing at either the state level or the local level. It also goes to plan development, it goes to monitoring, it goes to running statewide programs for the states that have that. Half of the funds then, or at least half of the funds, have to go to on the ground projects. And this is what in general the 319 program is known for, but it is an important distinction that really half of the money is used to support more programmatic activities for states and territories, and then half of it goes. This just gives you a glimpse of our funding history. And again, right now we're at about, we've been at about 170 or a little over $178 million. And so this is an interesting fact I'm sure you'll find, which is that to date, or rather since 2009, about $30 million, and this would be of the project funds, have gone to RC&Ds around the country. So clearly there is some good involvement there, and we have some other figures a little later on in the presentation that will further illustrate that. When the Section 319 funds do go out to these on the ground projects, it's usually through a request for proposals process that the state runs, not always, but in most cases. And so you might see an announcement like those that are highlighted here for non-point source grants. And sometimes it'll say section 319 and sometimes it won't. So that's just something to be aware of. So it might be called, runoff grants or targeted runoff grants or water quality grants. And in some cases, they're called 319 grants. But the important point here for councils that want to get more engaged is to be on the alert that most states will be putting these RFPs out every year. And these are RFPs that will be asking for organizations to come in that have projects ready to go. And we'll tell you a little bit more about what you'd need to have, what partners would need to have into place in order to compete successfully for those projects. Again, this is management plans. I think I told you most of this, but an important point here is that it's good. So a takeaway message from this slide is if you're an RC&D in a state, get to know your state's non-point source management plan. They're all publicly available. It'll lay out the state's outcomes and sort of overarching plans for 5 years. And then the state's annual 319 work plan, which they send to EPA, will be more detail about how they're going to enact those plans in the coming year. So it's good to know where your state is in implementing its 5-year plan. A lot of states do solicit public comment when they update their non-point source management plans. And so that is also an opportunity for partner engagement in many states. Okay. Had touched on this before, but this slide really lays out what I had started to say before, just about the structure of the program. So here's a state's non-point source management program. And then these are watershed plans, and we'll talk more about that in a second, but all of the watershed level projects that 319 funds, for the most part, have to have a watershed plan in place. And then, this slide shows it all happens because of partners on the ground. Like, I'm speaking to you from the standpoint of kind of EPA headquarters and our view of the program, but really the projects, are a ground up endeavor, and it's partners and landowners and that have a good plan to improve things locally, and then put that forward for funding. And then the sharing of the outcomes and the success. So we'll talk a minute about watershed-based plans, because to compete successfully for a 319 project funds, should an RC&D be part of a consortium that's coming in any state to try to get 319 funds for a plan, you need to have at least the beginnings of a watershed plan in order to compete well for those funds. The reason EPA has long required watershed plans in order to invest 319 funds in is it's the technical basis for getting to success with non-point source pollution, which is diffuse and might have hundreds or thousands of sources. Even a small watershed, a watershed plan helps to guide you into which ones are important to control in order to improve water quality. But importantly, as I was just saying, nothing happens without on the ground engagement, and so the watershed plan is also the plan for that. Who's important to involve in the community, what's the plan for reaching out to landowners, and how, who will keep the project going and keep everyone engaged. So this slide gives you a picture of the first point I was making there about a watershed plan being the technical basis for success in a project. So from a water quality perspective, if you think about, an area such as this one, which is a watershed in Indiana, you think about all the land that's covered here and all, every time it rains, all the runoff that's coming into the waterways. It is almost always the case that runoff isn't coming equally, from areas of the watershed. And so there will nearly always be what we call critical source areas, and they're shown here on this map in red. And you can get at these through, land use analysis from rough load reduction models, any number of ways. But basically, it shows you the areas that if you want to effect a water quality change, you really have to address these areas. And if instead you put a lot of practices in the white areas or the pink areas, you may not see a water quality change, or you'd be, let's put it this way, you'd be much less likely to see a water quality change than if you were able to get a good concentration of practices in this map, the red areas. So that's a really important concept in controlling non-point source pollution, and it's one of the most important things that a watershed plan will have. This watershed also has green areas flagged, which doesn't always happen, but we're happy to see it when it does, because although a lot of the emphasis in the non-point source program is on restoring impaired waters and stopping excess pollutants from coming into the waters, it's often the case, as it is here, that there are areas of the watershed that are in good shape and that have intact land cover and are good quality. And a watershed plan can also include steps to make sure that area remains in good shape. So that's something that's worth noting on this map as well. Okay, we're going to segue now to just some facts and figures that describe our partners and the number of projects we have, and I'll be able to highlight a few areas of our RC&D engagement. So the program is driven by partnerships, works by partnerships, and is really designed, with the 40% match. Congress clearly had in mind that 319 wasn't going to do it all, and that partner engagement and funding would be critical. And in fact, that's what plays out. The pie chart on the upper right here shows for an analysis that we did of a subset of projects, the partner contributions. So you can see the federal piece of the pie, a big chunk of contribution from states, a big chunk from local, local organizations, and this can be in kind or funding contributions. So this could be, staff from a local RC&D council or other local nonprofit that's helping to make the project work. Sid, I'm just going to give you an open invitation if you want to jump in on any of these slides to do so. So this slide looks at numbers of projects. So right now in the 319 program, we have about 1,800 active projects across the country. So that's always, it's a sizable number of projects that are always underway. And through the analysis that Sid did, she identified that, currently RC&Ds are named as partners in at least 50 active projects in 12 different states right now. So clearly there's a solid presence there. And it's possible that RC&Ds are partners in more projects, and, but, perhaps not all the partners might have gotten entered into our database for capturing this information, but we know at least for certain what we have shown here. And then towards the bottom, there's another interesting site that of the projects that RC&Ds have been involved in, a total of 20,000 acres have been put in conservation practices. So that's quite a significant impact as well. So diving into that just a little bit more, there have been 175 projects since 2009 that, again, specifically named RC&Ds as partners. And then the average of those, the average funding received, and Sid, I assume this is received by RC&Ds, is about $2 million a year. And then there's just some information here too on project focus areas. So you can see agriculture plays a prominent role with animal feeding operations or other, row crop or other conservation practices. And then the second category being land disposal, storage, and treatment, also an important category for the 319 program. And then a variety of other projects, as you can see here. And then below, you can see some of the most frequently implemented conservation practices, or BMPs, for those projects. So that should give you a little bit of a flavor. So pivoting to results. So we're very focused on delivering and communicating results that have been made possible by the 319 program. And 319 success stories are kind of our the gold standard for us. And those document, there's some language on this slide about type 1, 2, and 3, and I'm not going to dive into the different types, but the type 1 stories are kind of our gold standard. And that's where, as we were talking about before, state water quality standards were not being met. You know, there were excess nutrients or excess sediments or low dissolved oxygen or whatever it might be, such that the state water quality standard was not being met. And type 1 stories are where that was the case. And then through a non-point source restoration project, the water quality standard was met. And so we have, as you can see here, several hundred of those successes here. And then additional successes as well, which get at waters where progress is being made, but the water quality standard has not been achieved yet, or projects where other good things were happening in the watershed or in the waterway that were being captured. So we're very proud of our partners and our program for being able to deliver very discrete and meaningful environmental outcomes. And on the right-hand side, you can see kind of the miles of rivers and streams and the acres of lakes that have been restored through these success stories. So over 10,000 miles of streams and rivers and over 250,000 acres of lakes, ponds, and reservoirs have been restored, at least in part, where water quality standards have been met through these projects. So that's quite significant. And then of those stories, and of the, I guess, 670 stories, the stories capture the successes. So they're always a slightly lower number. 34 of those listed RC&Ds as a partner. So that's also significant. I'd say there's room for growth there. You know, if your councils want to get more involved, they could, but that's also a nice track record. Here we have just a couple examples from those projects. So the first one was in Michigan, and this is also, Jan, a dam removal. You mentioned that being a focus in one of your programs. So small dam removals can sometimes just be very successful projects at restoring hydrology and letting nature take its course. And in this project, the removal of a small dam and some related activity was able to increase dissolved oxygen in the water. And dissolved oxygen levels, of course, very, very important for healthy aquatic and fish populations. And then the second example from New Jersey is a riparian restoration project. I don't think I'm going to try to pronounce the name of the river, but in northern New Jersey on Bowers Brook. So this project took I guess, kind of a degraded turf-based riparian area and turned it into this beautiful lush area that you see here. And, again, we tag it to a particular parameter that wasn't being met and now is. And this for this example, that was total suspended solids, which were very high and now meet water quality standards. So to wrap up, basically, I hope you've learned some about how the 319 program operates and the ways that your councils can engage in it. Absolutely, councils are RC&Ds are an important partner. I think we've seen that and how they're reflected in the profile of 319 funded work. And if you're interested in growing that engagement, the takeaways I think are to for each RC&D to become familiar with their state's non-point source management program, perhaps reach out to the state non-point source program and just, meet and greet and get to know and share goals and objectives. And then definitely keep your eye out for the annual RFP that solicits watershed projects and look for partners that can help build good plans to get those projects done. And I think with that, and I would be happy to take questions when the time is right.
Okay, we can take questions now. So if any of our participants just want to unmute, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat and I'll facilitate that. So what questions do we have from our councils that are on today? Anyone have anything specific? Yes. Jean, you're muted.
Sorry, of
That's
course. Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, this is really interesting. As a council that has used 319 funding to work with farmers in different watersheds, I'm very familiar with this. I think one of the challenges that a lot of places encounter is that there's not an approved watershed plan. So I don't know if this question is, if you're the right person to ask this question to, but it really seems like the RC&D's ability to work with local partners, it really lends itself well to the planning process and the creation of a watershed plan. So within your umbrella or within EPA, what options or funding exists or support exists for the development of watershed plans?
Sure, and this will also be a great place for Sid to jump in if she wants to do so. But so EPA doesn't have independent funding outside of the 319 program for the development of watershed-based plans. 319 funding can be used for the development of watershed-based plans, and is that funding, generally, well, half of the funding, as I said, kind of has to go to the projects. And then it can be challenging, as you're saying, to have enough good plans kind of in the queue. And we know some states do struggle with that. They are able to use the other half of the 319 funding for developing either themselves or giving to other groups to develop watershed plans. So there's funding available for that. But I think, a candid assessment is there are a lot of competing demands for that money. And so it can be a challenge, there's no question. Sid, do you want to add to that? I see you're off mute.
Let's see, am I off mute?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, good. I think the only thing I would add is one of those slides early where we talked about different points to engage with the state, like with the actual management plan or in the watershed planning process, and just really reaching out to the state to see where their priorities are on completing 9-element plans. And then also depending on where you are in the process of the plan of developing a plan, to really reach out to the state to see if it might meet the minimum aspects of those elements, because a lot of times in the course of a plan, you can still, the idea is it's an adaptive process so that you're always refining as you go. So I think it'd just really be reaching out to see where the state agency is on that.
Okay. Did Una, did you have something? Yes, go ahead. Unmute yourself there.
First off, I wanted to thank everyone for this incredible webinar. It's just perfect. My own RC&D in California is working to do some restoration on a watershed. And I have partners that will, with the water quality, city water quality control board, and also nonprofits that do the technical support. And my own RC&D does outreach and community engagement. So I'm wondering if these the 319 program allows line items for outreach and education and engagement with community.
Absolutely. Outreach and education, that's closely tied to the implementation of projects to get water quality results. So yes, we see that as a really important part of the whole process. It takes a while to get people on board, to help folks in some cases get comfortable with adopting practices. They might need support to do so, and so having communications that bring people together to support the plan and to reach out to landowners and provide support for adopting practices, a really important part of success.
Okay. And Julie Winchell, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm in Texas. Blue Bonnet RC&D is just south of the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. And we are in the monarch conservation or the monarch butterfly fly zones and stuff. And I had noticed that that was listed in the NFWF, but it wasn't listed as is that not listed as a priority, or how does that priority work? Because I saw wildlife priorities in like the Colorado Basin, but.
Yeah, the Working Lands for Wildlife, that map that I shared, which monarchs is one of the priorities, will be covered in this year's request for proposals with NFWF. So any species that's on that map is eligible for applying for funding this year.
Okay, I didn't see the monarchs on the map, but maybe it was a bigger or
it's
scale or something.
Monarchs are definitely a Working Lands for Wildlife species. So yeah.
And can those types of projects be in conjunction? Because I do have an area, it's a fairly small basin that's a public water supply for a lake and has agricultural uses in it. And I'd like to see some buffer areas and go back with some of the native plantings for monarch. And we're in a rapidly urbanizing area. So it's like, if we could capture it now rather than later it might be gone. So is that something you could tie into water quality as well as wildlife?
Yeah, there's definitely that nexus to water quality and wildlife there. And depending on the program and who, I'd have to check with you on the NFWF grants. Although it's NRCS funding, I know they're working and using some of our programs. So there may be some program limitations onto the land use that it can be applied, but your probably local NRCS office is the best source, or I could follow up and check with our headquarters programs to just, see if there's any kind of sidebars on land ownership. Most of our programs are on working agricultural land.
Well, the headwaters of this, the Nolan River, are currently in working agricultural lands.
Yep.
But the area north of that is rapidly urbanizing. So I was thinking if we could get some help with the agricultural units, we may be able to get them to stay intact.
Yeah, so that's definitely eligible.
In place before, we see more urban migration this way.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it in place before, the houses go in upstream.
Yeah. It's hard to get rid of the houses once they're there.
Well, if we have the buffer in place before they go in, then it would help with sediment capture, and then it could provide that green space as well.
Absolutely.
So right now it's all in private. Most of Texas is in private ownership, even our waterways. The state only owns the water. They don't actually own the lakes or land under it. So, but this is on a publicly held lake. It's the city of Cleburne owns the lake, but the watershed above it is mostly still in ag, immediately above it at least. So.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Other questions from others that are on the call today? Does anybody else want to unmute or put something in the chat? I can't. Yes, Jean.
I have a second one, but I already asked one, so but I'm willing to just throw it out there. So one of the challenges with 319 and all of these grant proposals, honestly, where we're going to do something and how it's going to make the world a better place, is like tracking the metrics or the outcomes of it, right? So I was wondering, I'm sure we could have a whole webinar on outcomes and how to estimate those outcomes. But I was just wondering from the presenters what their piece of advice would be for someone who was trying to predict that in order to make a compelling proposal. But then also, once you have the money, and then how do you even make sure that you're making a difference?
Mm-hmm. I can take that initially from the 319 perspective. Great question. So a couple responses. One is the Sid referred to the 9-element plans, and that is what we call the watershed plans the 319 program asks for. And one or a couple of the elements get just at that, like how do you propose to kind of track your progress? And so, that can be any number of things, and I'll invite Sid to add if she wants, but, for example, acres in, for perhaps initially could be, landowners reached, and then, acres of practices in place, or, critical source areas where density of practice is above a certain percent. So there are a lot of different things you could do to track activity, meaningful activity that's getting towards, completion of the projects in the watershed plan. We also ask in the 319 program for annual load reduction estimates. And so if you haven't encountered this, they're rough estimates, modeled estimates of nutrients and sediments, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, that the projects are estimated to be keeping out of the waterways. And so we ask for that annually, and again, states generally will ask their grantees for the numbers, and then they'll provide us the numbers. But that's a rough indicator of activity, that's keeping pollutants out of the water, that we can do on an annual basis, while we all, know that we're going to have to wait quite a bit longer to see, if and when water quality improves. And so, and on that improvement, which I think was the last part of your question, really, in my experience, really the state water quality monitoring program has to step in there, and that can be, another thing that's connected to what are the watersheds they're going to focus in. And states rarely have the ability to monitor everywhere. And so part of identifying focus watersheds for implementation can be that a state will also be monitoring there, for the next 5 years or something. Not always, but sometimes. But mainly we do look to the state water quality programs, who know, again, where they've been investing project money and where partners have been investing in implementation. And then they go back and they check on a cyclical time frame, and at varying scales. Sometimes it's a tributary, sometimes it's more of the small watersheds. So generally that's how it works. I mean, there are some variations with some citizen monitoring, that kind of thing, but generally the state water quality monitoring program picks that part up.
Okay,
go ahead, Dina.
I did have a question for both of you before we have to end here. Is what are the length of these projects? Jan, for RCPP or the NIFWIF, are they multiple year, single year, or?
They are. RCPPs are typically up to 5 years. The NIFWIF are 2 to 3 years.
Okay. And for 319 program?
The 319 grants are 5 years each, and they go, but they're, on a sequential basis given every year. And then, so the projects within any grant, they typically need to be wrapped up within 3 to 4 years to be wrapped up within a 5-year grant. But that said, a watershed plan might take a few or dozens of projects over the years to get completed. So that doesn't mean a whole watershed plan has to be implemented in that time, but a discrete set of projects that have been laid out would need to be done within the period of that grant.
Okay, and there is a poll that has gone up, but Julie, did you have one more question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, how would you define a small watershed? Small in Texas may be way different.
Well, that is fair enough. So we use the USGS HUC system, hydrologic unit code, and generally speaking, HUC 12 is a typical management level. And yeah, I imagine it might be different in Texas, but and also out west, some of the hucks can be pretty big. But generally, we're talking about a Huck 12 level. It's roughly 40 square miles. Of course, it varies, but that is what we have found over time, is a level that's small enough that you have a shot within a reasonable time frame of, if you take a strategic approach, achieving some results and being able to measure them. Areas too big, Mississippi River Basin, for example, it'll be decades before you can measure progress.
Right.
Well, we consider our basin really, really small, but it's not that small. For a public water supply, it's really small in Texas.
Okay. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
I don't know if it was Sid I was talking with that said, is there a place that they can get a list of councils that have had projects or that they might talk to? Sid or Linda?
Sorry, I have like every one of everything muted just so I don't interrupt accidentally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can provide you with a spreadsheet to share with the group if you'd like, if you'd like to see all the success stories that identify RC&D as partners. And then I could also get you a summary of RC&Ds that are active right now on projects. Okay. And I'll try to get that project summary I was mentioning to you for those, so people can kind of browse and get a sense of what people are working on. So that you all can network. Yeah.
That'd be great. And I also have a list of the 4 RC&Ds that are the leads on RCPP right now. So we can send those out so you can see the kind of projects that they applied for. And some of them are single, but some are multi-state even. But that state council is the leader of a multi-state issue. So our next program will be on May 13th, and we'll be talking about soil health. So thank you both to our speakers today and for all the work you did for us, and for Susan and Appalachian RC&D for hosting us. Thank you.